This is my daughter, Indidi Mikiti, and she's one of 4 children that Imani and I had. And we inherited the store from him, and we're very proud of it and excited because he loved it and felt it was a sacred, special place. And tonight we have 3 of 4 of the poets that he chose to publish another book of theirs. And this is quite an evening. And I think the population of Harvard Square has been so decreased after their 3 years of graduation that there's not many people around in the square, but there are people on Zoom here. So quite a few people on Zoom. So don't be discouraged by that at all, because to us you are very, very special. And
yeah, and I think I'll just add that I was excited about this reading too, because that's kind of like a celebration, I feel like, of the Grolier Press poets and everything you guys are doing now. Like, I love hearing from you and about your current projects and working with you on reprints and hearing about new translations and new languages and dramatic renditions, and Partridge is now on our board. And you have a new book coming out, so I love hearing about what you're doing now. And you know, my dad would be
so proud.
Really proud and excited to hear about.
I was very proud of these poets that he published for the Grolier Poetry Press. And, so thank you so much for being here, and we are so happy to have these wonderful memories. And welcome people that are on Zoom. Of course, James is our editor who does such a tremendous job. And we have 3 volunteers who volunteered because they love poetry and they heard about the store. We have a new one named Mateo who goes to Medford High. And then there's who's at Arlington?
Vassar.
Say it again.
Vassar.
Oh, she goes to Vassar College. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And then we have Fiona, who's been with us quite a while. So they do incredible work, and they're volunteers, which is wonderful. So I have to
for coming. I'm just going to read you a little bit of information about the poets who we have with us tonight, and then we'll get started. So, Partridge Boswell is the author of the Grolier Discovery Award-winning collection, Some Far Country, and recipient of the 2022 Fish Prize for Flash Fiction. His poems have recently surfaced in Poetry, the Gettysburg Review, Poetry Ireland Review, Salamundi, the American Poetry Review, Hunger Mountain Review, Plume, Prairie Schooner, Rattle and the Moth. Co-founder of Bookstock Literary Festival and an advisory trustee of the Grolier Poetry Foundation, he teaches at Vallum Society of Education in Arts and Letters in Montreal, and troubadours widely with the poetry/music group Los Lorcas, whose debut release Last Night in America is available on Thunder Records. In 2011, Tino Villaneuva's first book of poems, Incommunicado, won the inaugural Grolier Discovery Award. His second, Last Call for Ganymede, followed in 2014 from Ilora Press. Along the way, he also authored 3 chapbooks, all with Pudding House Publications. His third full-length collection, Petrushka, is out this spring from Ragged Sky Press. A lifelong resident of Princeton, he teaches English at Camden County College in southern New Jersey. Tino Villanueva writes and also paints. He's the author of 7 books of poetry. His scene from the 1993 movie Giant won the 1994 American Book Award. 6 of his poems appear in the 2011 Norton Anthology of Latino Literature. His artwork appears on the covers and inside the pages of Green Mountain Review, Tri-Quarterly, and Parnassus. His latest book, So Spoke Penelope, published in 2013, has been translated into Italian, French, Greek, Russian, and Spanish. An anthology of part of his work, Anthology of Selected Poems, has been translated into French and published in 2015. One of his ekphrastic poems appears in the March 2016 issue of Poetry magazine. He recently retired from the Department of Romance Studies at Boston University. So thank you again for coming, and I'd like to just remind you to turn off your cell phones and enjoy.
Thanks so much for that intro and for coming. And yeah, it's wonderful to be back here, inside, actually inside the Grolier. Yeah, it's been a while, too long. Zoomers out there, just want to acknowledge you and say thanks for tuning in as well. So thanks, James, for inviting me and having this hosting this Old Home Day. I feel like it's that. It would a delight to be here with Keith, who broke trail, so to speak, by being the first recipient of the Grolier Discovery Award. And Tino, I owe a huge debt of gratitude still after all this time, because just after I got here for the very first time 8 or 9 years ago, I got this call a couple weeks later. It was Tino. He said, "Hey, you want to come read with me over at Gloria Mindock's series in Somerville?" I said, "Whoa, you must have the wrong number." You know, it's like to have a poet of his stature reach out to me, who is still in diapers, I guess, as a poet, barely walking. It has meant so much to me, and it taught me a great deal about reaching out, opening doors for other poets along the way. So thanks, Tino. Great to be here with you. I do have some poems for you. A British teenager is slowly emerging from a coma nearly a year after being hit by a car, and he has no knowledge of the coronavirus pandemic. Reuters, February 2021. Aphasia. That you can't talk yet, can only blink and smile, yes and no, both for perhaps, makes perfect sense. You'll find words later, or not, to correct journalists and historians' attempts. For now, what can be said? The shit hit the fan. The car, the child. The world collided with itself for a while. We were comatose, then woke, tidied up the mess, and moved on. Your disbelieving eyes widen as if to say, "Sea shanties? Really? We told you the water was rough. You'll just have to trust us." Overnight, a winding cabooseless train arrived and left. It's all the same and for the best. What's this world coming to, if not change? For good or ill, a keelless rudder against the waves. You wake at noon to afterthought, masked family milling about the bed, sensation returning to your limbs. One day soon, sun will glance the dewy pitch of your face, and a word like joy will come fluttering out. Just wait. No need to force it. The unthinkable takes time to process, and the clocks are still broken. Truth is, you didn't miss much, if anything. Another year at home, glued to your phone, arguing over whose turn it is to take out the trash. Some things are hardly worth forgetting. Take it slow. Let your body and mind get acquainted like new and ancient friends who come in from the cold. Sit down for tea and gaze out the window at something long lost and familiar to them both. A buried sled, or a mitten orphaned from its string. A name, perhaps, blooming through the melting snow. This next one begins with a line from Dennis Smith. Neither did the poplar tree. stick-up. Adjusting my mask as I entered the bank this morning, surly and self-amused, I want to announce to the teller, this is a stick-up. But then see her wearing her own mask. She could easily say the same to me. Our transaction ensues without alarms or security or even moving our lips. She hands me a receipt, and I think how in this country, freedom can mean doing whatever the fuck you please in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Or having a choice. Either I'm saying, raise your hands to the sky, or I hands down support you in your pursuit. Either I'm taking what isn't mine, including potentially your happiness, liberty, and life, or steadying the ladder so you can pick the highest, ripest fruit. In my getaway car, heist completed, I remove the mask masking the one I already wear, my facade of private fear so my phone's Face ID can recognize me. What can I possibly reveal that hasn't been worn threadbare? That I covet identity that covers both mercy and greed? That I'm a young brother who fits the description, tying his shoes as he heads out for a job that will end his life? Or a young sister in Kabul, dressed like a boy so she can go to school and learn how to save other lives? Can I say I now empathize with the invisible, criminal, Dalit, so marginalized they don't even fit on the page? That each time I affix and don this flimsy piece of fabric, I kneel to wash untouchable feet? Parked under this poplar, I'm seeing things I didn't before. Its new, heart-shaped, serrated leaves, soft-skinned and rough-edged, tender and dangerous. Its facile faces, unpolluted, trembling in early light with unqualified faith in what's to come. Unlike our own sturdy stoic surfaces, boasting 43 muscles well trained to betray us, a liar will look down to the left when answering. Pupils dilate when a lover finds her world shining in the eyes of one she's about to kiss. A breeze, light as breath, stirs a crowded rally of hearts to silent elation, hands waving wildly in a massive muted Zoom meeting, sign language ovation, cambium seething with unseen life beneath the bark. Not one leaf is still, and still we say nothing. No, I won't be beaten or executed today for breathing, nor stand in the way of the guy who calls me a fucking Democrat wearing a fucking mask while I'm holding the door to our general store as he tears off the one the store required and provided him. Thank you for keeping us safe, I'll say as he storms away. No, I won't proselytize masks I haven't worn. I'll write what my shrouded mouth can't rightfully say. Free to love. Free of the fear that divides us. The ground littered with limbs and disguises. I'll stay rooted to the spot until leaves are leaves, and wind is wind, and the world decides how to spin as it stirs itself again. Watching birds alight in high branches. Sing a verse of pity and regret, and beat their wings and vanish from sight. Thank you. Well, James has been asking, and Tino just asked me as well, the perennial question, so, do you have a new book? It's a really good question. I've gotten really good at dodging it. But I'm pleased to say my dodging days are soon to be over because I did just hear from a publisher who wants to publish a book this winter. And I can't even tell you who it is or what it is because they swore me to secrecy. But I'm very pleased that it will be entering the inventory here in the near future. So there you go, James.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and this, so it will feature among others this poem here, which begins with an epigraph from Doc Rivers. You may know Doc Rivers, Philadelphia 76ers. It's amazing why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back. The breakup. America, here's the thing. I'm my son's age again on a Greyhound bus, packed with friends and chaperones, patriots from our hometown headed for our nation's capital. While older kids secretly party and make out and back, we ride up front so we can see the improvised scat of your byway's strange window music unfolding. Retracing underground tracks back south, we sneak a pit stop at Gettysburg to stretch our legs and pay respect to thousands who gave their lives in the names of justice, unity, equality, freedom. Remember them? At any rate, the hotel has a pool right next to Watergate. We eat at McDonald's and my first Roy Rogers. It's your biggest birthday yet, even if bicentennial doesn't rhyme with bisexual then. All the monuments to great men are packed. All of us millings, snapping instamatics, breathing the same swollen air. Country of ours, you are going somewhere. Your Smithsonian launching out of stately brick into the final frontier of aerospace. My roommate picks a fight over candy or a souvenir, or maybe just because he has 3 brothers and misses them. All those hormones dressed up and nowhere to go but me. Whatever pretext, I let him pin and pummel me. He's a year older and a good liar. What choice do I have? Weirdly, my favorite sight isn't the White House or a sunken black wall that, like your conscience, doesn't yet exist. Or a lofty sacred light streaming through the rotunda's upper panes, or even a golden sun rising in a hero's welcome through columns of Lincoln's temple. The long pool's water light dancing in his marble eyes. Cherry trees lining the riverbank, like Arcadian sentinels banishing axes of corruption and lies. Nope, it's that mausoleum of words, the archives, I dig most. All those immortal oaths ghosting like superheroes under hermetic inches of glass. Words built to outlast shifting regimes and allegiances. Living words that can't be erased even by maniacal tyrants or plagues. I gaze, flabbergasted. No way those wrinkled parchment skins are genuine. No way their serifed eloquence says what we still need most to hear, or that God's hand scripted every letter in the blood of every woman and man who died to preserve them so we could be invincible, Godsmacked and free. On your birthday this year, we went now here. I'm sure you get our predicament. How my son isn't in school, memorizing preambles and articles. How this is no time for indoctrination or connection to each other, let alone the past. His generation being asked to dive deeper into the blackening blue night behind your dissolving stars and stripes, now that your icons have never meant more or less. On a bus ride back north, chaperone spent, my roommate and I sit together, best friends again. Our trip leader asks us to write our impressions. A week later, Mom's clipping mine from the local paper and taping them to the fridge. My first byline. I want to think the proud river of your demons-driven blood flowed through my pen in a cascading afflatus the editors couldn't resist. Not that I'm probably the only kid who wrote something. It's true, you'll always be my first big crush. Your skin from a distance, unblemished as the moon, untouchable, yet by then touched. You can see it in that first author photo the photographer took on our stoop, that smitten, beaming boy framed by his love letters, sacred text, redacted, clean of mushy stuff deemed too political, poetic, or true. Look hard, America. You can still get the gist. It's obvious you haven't changed a lick. You'll always have your youth. It isn't you. Disillusioned lovers like to jive in the movies we used to go see. You could tell even then. It's me. It'll always be me. That's good. Here's another another trip, another ride down memory lane. Some of you may recall the name Evel Knievel. That means anything to you? Yeah. Okay, I'm seeing inspiration for some of this at least. Yeah. I like to say it's where all the nonsense started. It's called Papa Wheelie. From oil-dank bowels of a nightmare garage, you ride benighted. Saturday morning's acolyte, sleep-dazed but aright. Straight for the ramp you built last night in your driveway, in homage to the great adrenaline-hazed Evel Knievel, archetype for every danger boy and bone-headed troglodyte bent on a bright schematic, vying to break more bones than the Guinness World Record, flying prone over cars, buses, lions, fountains, sharks, canyons, rattlesnakes, before the neighborhood wakes. Topping the slope, you rev your banana bike and pedal hard on the approach, past a hushed gang of squirrels and robins holding their breath, half hoping this levitation will and won't be your last. Did he always wear stars and stripes? Was his helmet screwed on tight? Will his next attempt be televised if he succeeds and fails yet again to reach the light? Devil dared and fair warned, you rocket as advertised off a wood plank, sailing headlong over fame's Coliseum into your first kiss and beer, Eucharist, your first dorm room farewell, and first rock concert at the Orpheum, your body's first chemistry experiments, and first storm of contrite indignation shadowing your first arrest. Your firstborn silence like a warm ghost. Your island that formed in a widening ocean when your first greyhound pulled away from the curb, taking a friend more than a friend. Inevitable as the first long gaze that followed. Soaring through every stunt since. Angling for the abyss, realizing too late your trajectory's off by an inch. And this is going to hurt. You brace yourself for that embrace. Thank you. I'm going to put in a very quick plug. Just, we're going to be back here. I'm going to be back here with my trio in a few weeks. I'm really excited about that, and I hope you can join us. Here you go, Zoomland. This is our new CD. Last Night in America, and we'll be featuring some poems from that as well. But that's going to be that's a rare thing to be able to play in here. I'm kind of jumping inside just to think of what that's going to be like acoustically. Looking forward to it. So like I said, the first time I read here was a while ago, and it was an indelible experience for me for a number of reasons, which you will hear in a moment. I'd like to dedicate this poem to Carol Menke. It's called Waiting for Spring. If Fanyi's introducing tonight's poets the way he's introduced 1,000 before us, suspended in never the same eddy twice, his warm basso brimming with insight, booming too robust for the doll-sized shop to hold. If Dylan Thomas's utopia was a womb with a view, tonight the Grolier's a womb with a view of the soul. Or at least an omphalos, stocked floor to ceiling with the soul's lint. We listen, imbibing a century's sacred layered breath of the muse's servants and their lovers. Eliot, Cummings, Frost, Bishop, Lowell, don't get me started. Ferlinghetti, Ginsberg, Haney, Platt, all made pilgrimages, except, alas, Spring Burman, who couldn't catch her flight. Our host laments for the third time, describing how she got waylaid in a gulch of Sonoran space-time while revising her astrophysics dissertation, and so can't be with us this night. If he mentions her not being here one more time, Carol leans and whispers in my ear, I'll throttle him. And I have to stifle a laugh at the wondrous, weird wording of her throttling per se, wedded to the wild abstraction of this sweet woman at my side, throttling anyone, let alone the man she loves most of all. Alas, her husband's on a roll, not trying on the dashiki of his senility as his loving spouse suspects, as much as just rehearsing his anaphora, which every poet in the room gets over and over like the chorus of a Phoebe's hopeful tune, sung winter long regardless. I only wish Spring Burman were here, he says again, alas. And in the frozen mud of this March night, I too wish Spring were here, that she didn't have to miss the bagel some Harvard kid burned upstairs, or the fire department arriving to rescue Mrs. Prothero's cats, the shop's cramped crowd spilling out onto Plimpton Street, poets standing around, watching their misted breath joke about burning books to stay warm, inhabiting the jubilant freak show of nothing more than what's happening at this absolute moment, waiting for the chief to call, to kill the alarm and call all clear, so we can duck back inside that tight, bright womb of words, and students shivering in their underwear can finish their meal upstairs, and the music can resume, pouring from its navel stone for anyone close enough in body or spirit to hear, hanging on every line as it floats free of that ancient kindled fire over the square into the wordless night. Thanks so much.
It took me a second, but of course I remember that night. I was here. I remember poor Carol was like, if he says that one more time, she's going to leap up and pull him down into his chair. But this is the perfect place for me, in effect, to be debuting this book, because it's where it all started for me. And Carol, I know I've said this many times to you, but my life has been full of blessings. But meeting your husband was up there, to be sure. I've maintained for many years that he represented the one-man antidote to all that ails the modern world, which is a very great deal indeed, if you haven't noticed. The cover girl's solution, the Russian puppet who is my hero, his solution is quite different. It's to thwack everything within thwapping distance into oblivion with his beloved slapstick. But we'll get to that in just a moment. So thank you so much for having me. It's great to read with you guys again. And I need to say as well that it's positively eerie to be reading this in front of this woman here. So, in fact, she created this monster. It's her fault. People always say, this book, it revels so in the perverse and the grotesque. I was like, well, have you met my muse? It's like, that explains everything, right? So, in general, I'm a big fan of interstitial patter, but I'm going to dispense with it. In fact, I think my whole pedagogical method is founded on interstitial patter, but in this rare instance, I will dispense with it and just head on in. I would rarely bother reading the epigraph to a volume, but in this case, for the benefit of my muse, I feel I have to do it. It's our founding father, Russian absurdist, and a just generally obstreperous person, Daniil Karms. When I see a human being, I feel like hitting him in the face. That about sums it up, right? I dropped the book, QED, at that point. So as with this book here that she adorned with that lovely illustration. This one is, of course, set in Russia, and is a vast symphonic arrangement with all of these intersecting characters, a chess master and a ballerina, and an idiot, and so forth. And of course, then the main attraction himself, but we'll get to him soon. The idiot. When you will not play the fool, you are an idiot, and left out in the street to drink vodka. And when you will not accept the boredom, the torture of living, of the feeling of being alive, you are mad and dragged off to the asylum. And if you resist, you are hysterical. Next, should you, for nausea, refuse to eat what you are served, they will bring you ripe gooseberries in fresh honey. Then, when you die of starvation, they will throw out your spring wildflowers and sing you arias. Ah, Katya, who is the ballerina, at least by implication. Ah, Katya, why must you suffer? Because that's what people do. And when they are done, they die. But meanwhile, we dance, for today we are not dust, we are human. And in 40 years at the utmost, we will both of us be dead. So whatever will not matter then, this injustice, that indignity, shall not matter now. After all, the world lives yet, and it is not life's fault that you are boring. I remember sending that to you the day that I wrote it. You remember that? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm not going to do this the whole time. But it is weird. The violinist. Performer. Oh, this is implicitly written by the same ballerina. The violinist. Performer at your play. Take this body in your arms, and tightening your fingers round her neck, lowering your cheek to her waist, lay the stroke of your bow across the strain of her frame, arcing wholly, as upon the gut plucked unstrung falls the stick weighted straight, along the belly fretted deaf, thrumming dumbstruck, until, with the twist of her pegs against the curl of her tail, swells the spread of her ribs over the arch of her back, cracks the voice, rolls the eye in her box. At the split of which timber, sweet violinist, lift, heel to bridge, your creaking instrument, one not to be fiddled with, up off the rosin's sticky rub, and beneath the making of your music, bend the breaking of her silence, unto its smashing into pieces of quiet. The next poem is called The Ballerina. The ballerina. In the stillness of her motion, through the silence of his air, the ballerina, as she dances, performs, despite the illness at her ease, out of the restlessness of her peace, these her pieces of movement, for the salvation of their grace, to feel the feeling of being none other than the thing that something is when it is nothing, but one leap up, out to no point, spin in, down, round no center. Until, at the tap of crushed satin, with the brush of ruffled taffeta, into its pointed pirouettes, round its arched arabesques, the figure of her frame, against the violinist's strained timber, setting the edge of its bend, fretting the gut, bowing the waist of its curves, limbs the image of a vision, of a grand master's ivory queen, in the shape of one form, for the fact of all matter, silent, still. I'll now read a sequence of short prose pieces with which this volume is teemingly replete. And I realize I've just gone to the wrong section. So it actually reminds me of one of my classes, fumbling about desperately to find my place to no avail. but this is from a section called Parables. Once in a village lived two men who thought too much of themselves, one in the sense of too highly, and the other in the sense of too often. By and by it was found that their miseries, while different, were roughly equal, because misery is misery after all. As for the other two fellows, who thought too little of themselves, one in the sense of too seldom, and the other in the sense of too low, they found their own ways to be unhappy. Out in the country somewhere lived a man who was always right, which worked out well enough for him. During the same period, in some city or other, lived a man who was always wrong, which worked out even better, because he was wrong loudly and with a stick. For where there is no certainty, certitude will do, and in the absence of true authority, authoritativeness serves well enough. That much is sure. As for the man from the taiga who told the truth, no one believed him. Or if they did, they didn't care, and moved along soon enough. But when it came to the man from the steppe who lied, to him they accorded credence and credibility alike, because being right is nice, but feeling right is nicer, which feels more than right and is called righteous. Nicest of all is when everyone else is wrong, or can be made to seem so, which is the same thing. Anyway, who would ever know or be the wiser? People's credulousness is past believing. It happened that two men met at an intersection. "Move," said the first man, "I am walking." "No," said the second, "I am also walking, and I am stronger." In this he proved correct, because by then the first man had been pounded to mush with a mallet. Being strong has its advantages. One day, a man was doing something stupid. Another told him to stop. "You cannot stop me. I am a man. This is a free society," the first man insisted. "No, it is not," replied the second. "If it were, I would beat you with a stick and steal your things." Then he slapped the daft man across the mouth with an open stroke and helped himself to his pocket watch. "You see, if you keep it up, I will come for your wife." But the half-wit kept it up, even though he knew he was in for it, because he was simple, so that was his nature. "People make mistakes," he pressed on, after a pause. "Yes," the irritable chap answered, "but better ones make fewer and smaller." Then he kicked the mistaken fellow in the shin with terrific force, and cleaning himself off, made his way to his wife to be finished with the business. He had warned him. But when he got there, she had lovely hair, and the man sang her an old song instead. He was human. That's as close as you get to a happy ending in this book, so drink it up. I'm going to put a little more spring in your step with this next poem entitled Death. There are so many ways to die. There is the way of my brother, Ferdinand, who was killed by a bayonet in the field, which is the way we understand. Then there is the way of my uncle, who, stricken with consumption, suffered greatly for many years before dying alone in the state hospital, which is the way we understand, but still look away from. There is likewise the way of the idiot out in the square, who drank so much vodka he leapt naked through the ice into the river. This is the way we grow familiar with, and yet never get accustomed to. Of course, too, there is the way of my grandmother, no less unacceptable for being foreknown, and of the peasant woman who went screaming in childbirth, or of the farmer from the next village who fell over on his way to the market, then starved to death in a snowbank by the side of the road, until at spring thaw he was found in a ditch, being eaten by dogs. These are the ways that we cannot even bring ourselves to speak of. But then there is also this way, the way where you do not die so long you are past grieving, which is one some call living and others prefer not to talk about. Others, but not all, evidently. I would now like to read a poem called Piszczyk, which is the name of the little grating, squeaky whistle with which the puppeteer made the cursed chord of the Petrushka's voice. Piszczyk. Squeaky Piszczyk, cheap, utterly speechless, your unspeakable peace, in the thoughtlessness that comes of knowing, beyond a doubt, that nothing you will ever say will prove at all interesting, much less important in the slightest, to the leashed monkey screeching by the asylum window in perfect idiocy of matters of pure indifference. Then in effect, the companion poem is called Dubina, which refers to the slapstick that I referred to earlier. Dubina. Batty slapstick, thwack, your master's kolpak full flat. Then, beneath it, beat into extinction the intelligence that renders too much intelligible, save in the meaningless sense of the swelling jellyfish, still undulating dumbly on the omnipresently indifferent sea of its own inviolate oblivion and ignorance pristine. Now, a few about my main man himself, the Petrushka. He was a real charmer, believe me. It's like a one-man Three Stooges routine. One day, a puppet realized that he had never turned his head to the left. When he did, he saw a group of people standing there looking stupid. "Get back," he cried, "or I will beat you with my stick." But they did not move back and were made sorry for it. Next. One day, for no good reason, a straw puppet became a conscious being. After considering himself a moment, he picked up his slapstick and made his way to the ballerina, whom he had at with a rare and gay alacrity until most of what had been on the inside of her had come out. Next, he went in search of her Moor, whom he took to with a buoyant insouciance until just about all that had in him gone down got brought up. By that time, though he was not done hitting things, he had run out of things to hit, as the show had only the 3 puppets in it. But then, noticing it there for the first time, the fool wheeled sharply round and directed his attention to the finger itself, hacking away at it with the blade in a fulsome ebullience until there was a good deal of blood around. The next day, at the same point in the production, he made to mount a second insurrection. But this time the puppeteer was ready for him, and with a mallet, which he brought down on the dummy's head with great force and no small satisfaction. In this way did the man lose his second finger. What happened to the third is from a different story. Next. Once there was a puppet who insisted to passers-by that he was not himself, but someone else. "Look at me," he entreated, jerking one upper extremity or another about wildly in a tangle of strings. "My arm is moving, but I am not moving it. There is something inside of myself that is not myself." In time the trickster would even give up whipping both his horses and his whores, at which point he recentered his efforts on his own treacherous head, whose capped pate he batted at nonsensically with his slapstick until it had been beaten perfectly witless. For who knows how such a thing could get in there, or how else it could be got out. One more from this section. The Petrushka, however stupid, was no fool. Thus it was that one day, while gaping outward at the crowd, the buffoon was brought round to the view that the ring of unproductive flaccidities there around arrayed, if not beyond it, their entire inhuman race, unmanly kind in all its lordly vaingloriousness and cocksure asininity, amounted to but a single, all-unknowing, omnipotent orgy of fruitless self-abuse. Indeed, such as needed to be shown, their life was no mere spectator's recreation, a petty dalliance at the opera or ballet, but a matter, in fact, of brute contact and raw friction, to be had at, as in combat, by feral atavists. As it happened, their world was so small it made him claustrophobic just to think about it, and no less vertiginous at the prospect of staying stuck in it. So, resolute in his recusancy, the mischievous imp leapt outward forthwith among the throng, and began thwacking away at them spastically with his slapstick, until everything that had therein been compacted got bashed out. Whereupon the spiteful Ottomite, with a grin of fiendish glee, sprung forward in his turn, and sliced the unstrung sack of parsley sprigs clean to ribbons, at which juncture his flawed bauble eye lustrous with bloodlust. The accursed Persian met your own furtive gaze, and was not overlong in being upon you, too, such as you were, and, to a lesser extent, still remain. Sometimes people get what they deserve, other times simply what they get, which serves them right. And I will try to break with this precedent I've established, and try to read one poem of some redeeming value. Uncharacteristic. At the country estate. And it was then that there, in the cherry orchard, by the gooseberry patch, the honey bee bumbled through pied wildflowers, sucking at the comb in the pollen from the pistil sprout, because the swell of the nectar was creation, because the prick of the sting was deliverance. And yet, here, now, as the dew frosts the meadow grass, a blackbird circles over the lake's breaking fever, whistling at the crack of the dawn for the trickle melt, because all that is heaven is air, because there is no sound but music. And I will end where the Petrushka himself ends. In conclusion, so foolish had proven the Petrushka that in the end there seemed simply no limit to his stupidity. In fact, just when you thought that at last you'd come to some terminus, and after so protracted a succession of errata, he appends an addendum, and such as will have to be redacted thereafter, or should be, if our ministers at the Secretariat can see their way towards acting rationally. Thus it was that after the flap of chintz arras had fallen once and for all on what had theretofore forever seemed but one more penultimate performance in our omnibus productions run, the antic mannequin, having long since batted both the ballerina and her blackamoor past even slap happiness, kept up his thwacking all across the punch-drunken countryside, until he had beaten legions of already insensible peasant tenanters and other such provincials perfectly senseless, after which the clownish knockabout paraded straight away into the Presidium and pummeled every last party official to mush, whereupon the bungled dummy, having already thrown off his own golden hoard of Tartars' yokes upon the scaffold, appointed himself supreme leader, as only befit such a creature of steel. Thereafter followed, by the inexorable machinery of our history, several generations of unrestrained subjugation, from which, my dear comrades, we still have yet to re-emerge. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Thank you, James. Thank you, Carol. And And yeah, thank you, audience. And I always like to say that there must be other cultural activities going on in the Boston area, and yet here you are. So thanks for that. I do have a handout, but I'll wait on that. Okay, one is always excited about the latest book that one has published, and it's still So Spoke Penelope, which is right here. It's been translated, as was said in the introduction, into French and Italian. They're up there. Let me read. You all remember Penelope from the Odyssey? She waits 20 years for her husband Odysseus to return from the Trojan War. The Trojan War takes 10 years, and it takes Odysseus 10 more years to finally get back home. She waits for this guy, okay? So what patience, what love. At some point around the Greek islands, I would say around the 12th, 13th year, everybody knows that the war is over and the Greek heroes are back, Agamemnon and Nestor. They're back on their islands, but where is Odysseus? She doesn't have word about him at all. So at one point she has 108 suitors visiting the palace. They all want to marry her, okay, because where is her husband? So she's fair game. So here we go. So here's how it starts. So spoke Penelope. So I want to get these 3 poems in, and then I'll start chronologically with my first book. So spoke Penelope. This is the palace where I've learned to survive, where 2 years ago I embraced Odysseus, stout son of Laertes, one last time. One long embrace was all it took to shape one heartbeat between us before he left for Troy. This is the palace I walk around in from hall to hall, a world of stone and wood that is mine. This is the room where I work in wool and talk it out with myself, where still awake I toss and turn, pace around in the middle of the night, convincing myself once more that the earthly idea of love is still the lifeblood of my body. This is the palace where I wear the crown of faithfulness, where the sound of the sea is the sound I think with. Therefore, if I stand by a window, expecting each time to see the outline of a ship coming toward me, what is it but my love and the passion time gives it to grow for Odysseus, like-minded husband of the cunning mind for whom I wait? So spoke Penelope when she awoke this morning, when the golden cloth of dawn rose out of the sea. Second poem that I've chosen is titled The Waiting. Consider that Penelope is not a goddess and Odysseus is not a god. They're both mortal, just like you and just like me. So they have a notion of time. The gods and goddesses have no notion of time, no notion of the passing of time. So she must have asked herself at one point, am I the only woman who's waited this long for a husband or brother, who's off to war, or a cousin, or father? The waiting. Has ever a woman waited like me? Waited and waited, and if she hadn't, would have had too much to lose, would have been denied so terribly a husband, not to mention orchards, many, droves of sheep and swine, plow fields all around, and twining vines for wine. How many women, I wonder, have waited like me by the sea with a racing, caring heart, women who waited, stood waiting, lay waiting like me. From where you are every night above me, Tell me with your truthful mouth, sky god Zeus. Tell it clearly to me, Athena and Apollo, luminous gods and goddesses who inhabit the high halls of Olympus. How many women before me have waited like me? And I'll try once more, page 58. Love Bound. The sun rose, blossomed into brightness, then took its time heading toward the center of the sky. There it stood, solitary, keeping its place, glaring down until the shadowed spaces were on the move again, by which time I was bored, hungry, so I had a bite to eat. While the maids on their knees kept grinding and sifting wheat and barley grain, heaping handsful cupped together, 600, someone said, measured into baskets big, and grumbling they were all the while, working masses of dough into flat loaves for the fire. I slept, and awoke at the moment when the sea was glazed with red becoming orange. It was Helios, at the end of his run on the horizon's precipice. Then was gone. In my room and around the palace, darkness abounds, my mind sitting in shadow when two thoughts come to light, that out of love bound together by whatever binds together love over time, I can wait for Odysseus, the man I like to think is mine alone, that whatever lives in me I call love, true wife love, kept deep in the bone where only a wife can know it. I wish I could read some more from here, but that will be it for that. Okay, my first book is titled There's Another Voice Poems. Actually, it's in Spanish, Hay Otra Voz Poems, because there are poems in Spanish, poems in English. It's bilingual. There are no translations to the poem. It just hints at the fact that there are poems in Spanish and poems in English. So let me begin with the very first poem. There was a professor, when I was an undergraduate, there was a professor who, it's a long story, which I'll short, who suggested that I read T.S. Eliot, The Beats, Corso, Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti, and Dylan Thomas. So I did. I was in a English Romanticism course, okay, so I was a blank slate. So what was poetry for me then? Well, what the Romantics were, what I was studying. This professor said you have to learn the modern idiom. I didn't know exactly what that meant. So I read Thomas, The Beats, and Eliot. I really fell in love with the language of Dylan Thomas. And I wanted to write like him. And I did write 3 or 4 poems that were published. They were mimetic poems, imitation poems. Later I figured out that, I had to develop my own language, Dylan Thomas, I was imitating someone else's language, but I learned a lot from Dylan Thomas. So he was my mentor and my tormentor, I guess. So he has a poem, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. It's about birth and death. And what I liked about his poetry in general was the way he used very tight economical language, alliteration, single syllable words in a row. I've never seen that before. And I think it's in the poem, This Bread I Break, where he has 18 single syllable words in a row. Wow, that blew me away. And I noticed that he used a lot of compound adjectives, something that English does wonderfully and Spanish cannot. The Romance languages cannot. So whenever I read, I buy the New York Times, and I just check out the front page. This is today's New York Times. And there are 8 such compound adjectives. I'll do some. Let's see, prime time hearing, okay, prime time. Oh, and all you need to use, these adjectives are not in the dictionary. You create them yourself by using a hyphen. Could be 2 words, could be 3 words, could be 4 words, okay? Such as this never before seen experiment, okay? Never before seen with hyphens. Romance languages can't do that. Okay, so that's one. 9-member committee, 246-year history, of course, talking about last night's, you saw that. Best known names, okay, best known, hyphen in between. Okay, I think you get the idea. There are, sometimes I have found as many as 11 one time, you know, just on the front page of the New York Times. Okay, here we go with my certain burn toward pale ashes, which is sort of an answer to the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. My certain burn toward pale ashes is told by the hand that whirls the sun. Each driving breath beats with a quick pulsing face. My falling stride like sand toward decision drains heavy with fixed age. Each ghostly grain a step in time that measures tongues. My ruddy sea that streams to dryness bears bewildered its clay bone. Each vessel's roar at God's speed drowns by force. My waking light began when the fertile lips spun my pulse, and I, with muted tongue, was drawn, destroyed from the making mouth into this mass. And held below by nature, the sweeping hand now turns my dust-bound youth. Tell the world that I was struck by the sun's grave plot. Now, you don't have the text before you, but whereas Dylan Thomas had 18 single-syllable words in a row. See, my poem has 19. It starts with hand toward the end, hand, sweeping hand. Hand now turns my dust-bound youth. Tell the world that I was struck by the sun's great pot. So I was having a little fun with it, and I was kind of learning how to put together. There are no rhymes, but it does have a structure, just like Dylan Thomas's, you know, he was my hero, I mean, what can I tell you? Second poem from the same book is called Catharsis, written at the end of, I think it was spring semester, it's about pulling an all-nighter. You remember those, some of you? I figured out later that I must have been reading Ginsberg, the Beats. I didn't know then. I did a lot of reading on Dylan Thomas, you know, about his life, the biography, articles, and so forth, but nothing on the Beats. I didn't know that they were into jazz. I don't figure that out. I don't read that until years later, okay? And I started reading Kerouac, you know, On the Road and all that. So I must have been influenced by the Beats, because this has a different kind of cadence, okay? It doesn't sound like Dylan Thomas, it doesn't sound like T.S. Eliot. Catharsis. Into the page-stuffed night and Pavlovian-like response at semester's end, I go groping through Lorcas, New York surrealism, Whitman symbology, greenboard formulas, and untangling dangling participles by midnight tick-tock alarm clock. In late fall and spring comes this ritual of grotesque notebooks, thoughts surrounded by underlined paragraphs of future. And shortly, early rays come solid through the curtains in my cramming for a final classroom catharsis. With only the morning sun for breakfast, turning the pages in habitual syndrome with cigarette, I yield to nausea. All right, so that's from my first book. I Otra Voz poems. Shaking Off the Dark was my second book. let me read a poem about creativity. First section has to do with the muse, creativity. How does one get inspired? Why is inspiration here one moment and then gone the other? Why does writer's block, you know, for lack of a better expression? But that's what some writers go through, and at some point you're working on a poem and you're stuck, but then you pick it up one day and you read it and you see it's that aha moment, that epiphanic moment when you see where the poem is going and it's time to finish it, okay? You can see the end. Something beyond light. Horizon cleared of mist, claiming part beauty, part dreams. I move toward it in search of names worth saving, ordering stages of my life within the grace that keeps giving. Unbounded, the landscape and the simple stones shudder in dawn's cast. I accept this endless peace. I am called to by something beyond light. Everything matters, feels more generous, alive. I see as I've never seen before. In this long shimmering present, I write out my heart's memory, tell stories under the spell of my own senses. Line by line, I break silence with words too sudden to refuse. It's that moment the words keep coming and you have to take advantage of that. You think you hit the mother lode and you gotta go with it. Variation on a theme by William Carlos Williams. Oh, you know this very famous poem by William Carlos Williams. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you probably were saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet, so cold. Now, I heard Kenneth Koch, he came to BU and did a couple of readings back in the 70s. The second time he showed up, he read a parody of this poem. He's got 5 poems, and they were hilarious. So I said, okay, I'll try one. So this is a variation of the theme by William Carlos Williams. Does everyone know what tamales are? Mexican tamales? Okay, I don't have to explain. Okay. I have eaten the tamales that were on the stove heating and which you were probably having for dinner. Perdóname, they were riquísimos, so juicy and so steaming hot. Okay, that's my contribution. That's my contribution to that genre. Crónica. Next book I wrote, after my second book, I decided not to mix the languages, so from now on it's either all in Spanish or all in English. So my next book is 18 poems, all in Spanish, called Chronicle of My Worst Years, Crónica de mis años peores. I'll come back to it at the very end. I have a poem in the handout. Scene from the movie Giant that was mentioned a while ago. It has to do, 21 poems, has to do with the next to the last scene in the movie Giant from Hollywood films, 1956, with Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor, James Dean, and Dennis Hopper. It's that scene where it takes place in Texas. The year is 1950. This is 14 years before the Civil Rights Bill was signed by President Johnson, right? The Civil Rights Act of '64, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, gender, national origin, and it provided injunctive relief against any form of discrimination in public accommodations, such as hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, swimming pools, and similar establishments. So in this scene, the owner of this roadside cafe does not want to serve Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and their daughter because their daughter-in-law, Juana, is there with this little brown baby, and they don't serve Mexicans. So you would see these signs around in some restaurants. So African Americans would not have gotten served at some of these restaurants, nor Mexican Americans. So that's what the drama is about in this next to the last scene. And it develops into this fisticuff, into this fight between Rock Hudson and the owner, because right after they sit down, Rock Hudson and his family, three elderly, very Mexican-American looking individuals, elderly, kind of shuffle in and they sit down. And the owner sees them and says, hey, you can't sit here. Anyways, a whole dialogue that goes on, which I won't go into. Anyway, Rock Hudson has been observing what is occurring in the foreground, and he challenges the owner, and there's a fist fight. The owner, this huge guy, beats up on Rock Hudson, and I thought, as a 14-year-old who saw the film, why did Rock Hudson lose the fight? And what I figured out much later is that he lost the physical fight, but he won the moral fight. He stood up for something good, okay? So when I speak to high school students, I ask that question, why do I say that Rock Hudson won the fight? Here's how the book begins. I'll just read one part. Scene from the movie Giant. If we had more time, we show the 6-minute film, a 6-minute episode. What I have from 1956 is one instant at the Holiday Theater where a small dimension of a film, as in a dream, became the feature of the whole. It comes toward the end, the cafe scene which reels off a slow spread of light, a stark desire to see itself once more, though there is at times no joy in old-time movies. It begins with a jingling of bells and the plainer truth of it that the front door to a roadside cafe opens and shuts as the Benedicts, Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor, their daughter Luz and daughter-in-law Juana and grandson Jordy pass through it, not unobserved. Nothing sweeps up into an actual act of kindness into the eyes of Sarge, who owns this joint and has it out for dark-eyed Juana, weary of too much longing that comes with rejection. Juana from barely inside the door and Sarge, stout and unpleased from behind his counter, clash eye to eye as time stands like heat. Silence is everywhere, acquiring the name of hatred, and Juana cannot bear the dread, the dark jowl gaze of Sarge against her skin. Suddenly, bells go off again. By the quiet effort of walking, 3 Mexican types step in, whom Sarge refuses to serve. Those gestures of his, those looks that could kill a heart you carry in memory for years. A scene from the past has caught me in the act of living. Even to myself I cannot say, except with worried phrases upon a paper, how I withstood arrogance in a gruff voice coming with the deep-dyed colors of the screen. How in the beginning I experienced almost nothing to say, and now wonder if I can ever live enough to tell the aftertale. I remember this, and I remember myself locked into a back row seat. I am a thin, flickering, helpless light, local-looking, unthought of at 14. Okay, and I shall end. We have time. You can follow, can you pass these to the back? And, okay, I'll give you 2, James. It's not a syllabus, it's a poems in Spanish with a translation. I don't know if you have enough.
Okay.
Everybody, Qué bueno, okay. I'll read the short poem that's on one side of the sheet. Más la voz que el tiempo. This is a chapbook of 10 poems on memories, one of my themes from Primera Causa, First Cause. I wrote them in Spanish, and my translator, Lisa Horowitz, excellent translator, translated them. So I'll read Más la voz que el tiempo. You can follow along in the English translation. We all have memory. The writer takes it one more step and uses it as a muse, memory as inspiration. The Greeks had a goddess, the goddess of memory, Mnemosyne. Yeah, you remember Mnemosyne. Okay, más la voz que el tiempo. Quería escribir y me dolía. Toda la tarde atado al escritorio, a un papel sobre la mesa de trabajo, equivocándome, defendiéndome del error y del ocaso. Quiero decir que pasaron horas, luego días, y cómo entender la existencia que refugió en el aire y en penumbra. ¿Cómo decirlo exactamente? ¿Cómo trazarlo con bolígrafo o a lápiz? Lento es rememorar en claro, recorrer las sombras del recuerdo. Ahí también está la vida. Memoria mía, dame lo que es mío y enséñame la pura manera de contar lo que se ha ido, que pueda más la voz que el tiempo. And she translated it as voice over time. And then you can flip the page, and I will read, I'll end it with a homage to words, convocación de palabras, and it comes from Chronicle of My Worst Years. Okay? The words in English that you see there come from 3 little notebooks that I started when I was working at a furniture factory right after high school. And then I went into the service and came back, and then went back to the factory, and then I went to college. I wanted to work at the post office, and someone said, well, there is a math section in the civil service exam, and math and I didn't get along too well in high school. Another person said there's some analogies also. I didn't know exactly what analogies were. And another person said there's a vocabulary section also. I said, if I learn all the words in the dictionary, I'll have a crack at it, and I'll score so high that I'll pass the exam. This could have happened last weekend, okay? I remember this was life-changing, okay? I hope this comes through in the poem. Any word that I heard, either on radio or television, that I saw in a newspaper, that I didn't know, I would write it down on these, turned out to be 3 little notebooks, okay? And with the definition, of course. And so when I wrote the poem, I was just trying to pass a civil postal exam. I didn't know I was going to wind up in college at some point. So here we go. Oh, and something happened as I was learning these words. My self-esteem went up. What I thought of Tino Villanueva, okay, that took me by surprise. Here we go. Yo no era mío todavía. Era 1960 y lo recuerdo bien, porque equivocaba a diario el sentido de los párrafos. En la umbría de una tarde ennubrecida, con aire desvalido, asistía a la vergüenza de no entender del todo lo que el televisor estaba resonando en blanco y negro. Desharás, me dije, las sanciones en tu contra, irresoluto adolescente, recién graduado y tardío para todo, disciplinado a no aprender nada, harás por ti lo que no pudo el salón de clase. esta será tu fe. Infraction, bedlam, ambiguous. Las convoqué en el altar de mi deseo, llevándolas por necesidad a la memoria. En la fecundidad de un instante me fui multiplicando, affable, prerogative, egregious. Cada vez tras otra asimilé su historia, lo que equivale a rescatar lo que era mío. Priggish, issue, impecunious. Porque las hice doctrina repetida horariamente, de súbito yo ya no era el mismo de antes. Assiduous, faux pas, suffragette. Ahora desciendo inagotablemente de ellas. Son mi hereditaria ofrenda, huellas de sangre vivida sobre el papel constante. Exhume, queremonious, kibitzer. Tenaz oficio el de crearme en mi propia imagen, cada vez con cada una al pronunciarla. Postprandial, subsequently, y de escribir por fin con voluntad las 14 letras de mi nombre y por encima la palabra libertad. Thank you.